Good afternoon. Welcome back to Candid Comments that's brought to you by Schenectady Inner City Ministries. And my name is Shirley Ray Dean, and today's guest is the Reverend Sara Barron, the pastor at First United Methodist Church, Schenectady. Hi, Sara, or
Hi.
Reverend Barron.
Hi.
I don't know whether I should call you the right Reverend Barron or Sara.
You should call me Sara.
Ah, okay, Sara, that's good. Sara, I really am glad that you're here. Now, you haven't been in Schenectady very long, have you?
It's been just over 2 years that I've had the chance to be here.
Oh, well, then you're really a fairly like a newbie.
For this city, I certainly am.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're a newbie, because one of the reasons I wanted to invite you on was to kind of get your impression of Schenectady regarding where it's at economically and service-wise, those kinds of things. And so primarily talking about where we're at with regard to poverty in Schenectady.
Okay.
And
I think I have 3 things that I've noticed that have been really interesting about Schenectady compared to other places I've lived. The first is that there's a really profound investment in community in Schenectady in a way that I've never seen anywhere else. Now, I can't figure out if I just didn't spend enough time in Vermont and it's sort of a hangover of the New England town meeting idea, or if it's all those engineers and their belief that all things are fixable. I don't know where it comes from, but when there's a problem, I hear people say, all right, well, let's get together and fix it. And there's not an expectation that it's someone else's job.
oh,
And there's not a concept that it's just the way it is and it isn't fixable. But there's a sense around here that things can be fixed. My other guess is that this is really the impact of SICM, that over the years, all the ways that SICM has identified problems and found ways to respond to them has started to make people believe it's possible.
and it is in many cases. Primarily, as you've been looking at this city, do you have some sense of pockets of the city that may not have as much of that advantage as others?
The truth, I think, in Schenectady is that almost all of the city is struggling. I'm told that Woodlawn is doing better, but I'm sure that there are pockets of poverty in Woodlawn. We make jokes about things being up on the hill, that Hamilton Hill and Mount Pleasant are the 2 neighborhoods struggling the most. But I live on Eastern Avenue, and things aren't easy there either. The vast majority of this city is struggling pretty mightily.
It's interesting because just this week I received a writing in my email regarding poverty in the United States, and it says that poverty among children in the United States is the highest it's been since the Depression. And if that's endemic across the United States, then obviously we do have poverty here in Schenectady.
The numbers I've heard are that more than 50% of our kids live under the poverty line, and of course we know that more than 80% would be eligible for free or reduced lunch. That would indicate that more than 80% of our children have insufficient access to food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of, who are these children? How do you perceive that?
We're lucky in our church to have some opportunity to see some of these children face to face, and I think it's much easier to understand. But I wanted to also look at some numbers because I think they're
Sure.
interesting. And I wanted to start by just pulling up a map, and the map defines what I am meaning when I say Schenectady in this case, because Schenectady is a county, of course,
Right.
and Schenectady is a city, and Schenectady is also a city in which it is sometimes undifferentiated from Scotia and Rotterdam and
true.
Niskayuna. But in this case, I'm talking about the city of Schenectady proper, and I pulled these numbers just about that city.
Okay.
And I think it's important to note that. I think it's really interesting that the vast majority of our children are living in homes with single parents.
In Schenectady.
In Schenectady. Of the homes that have children in them, and that's about 40% of households in Schenectady, 28% in total, so out of 40%, 28% are single households, and only 7.5% out of that 40 are married with children in the household. So when we traditionally think about what a family looks like, that is not what a family looks like in our city. And God loved the single parents because, boy, I'm not a parent. I respect parents, and parenting is hard, and parenting is much harder when there's not someone there to give you a break.
This is true. This is very true. So we've talked about the fact that we have children who are many times hungry.
Yeah.
And we had Superintendent Spring was on one session of ours, and he talked about that too, and the effect of that lack of good nutrition, how it impacts education.
Yeah.
And maybe you'd like to speak a little bit about that too, because...
Well, studies are really clear on this. When you don't have enough nutrients, you can't learn. And we have unfortunately seen in circumstances around the world where children have been in orphanages or other care facilities without touch and love and food and nutrition, people grow up and are not able to function as well as they could otherwise, which means that I work with adults with disabilities in other parts of my life, and some people who are adults with disabilities might not have had disabilities or might not have had as severe of disabilities if they had simply had access to adequate nutrition as children.
Right, I agree with that. Also, this is a community, unfortunately, or I don't understand it really, that has not a whole lot of real educated members. So, and we need to talk about that a little bit.
We definitely do need to talk about that. I am perhaps overeducated in this city, so I fear boring other people. But this is, the level of education in this city is profoundly low. When we look at the numbers, 64.1%, so let's call that 64% of people have a high school diploma or less, and actually a few more people out of that don't have a high school diploma than do. So we're talking about the largest chunk of education in our city is the 33% of people who don't have a high school diploma, and then the 32% of people who have just a high school diploma. And it's hard to make a living wage on that amount of education. And then we have got 24% of people who have some college, which is great. People who have tried, but that means that the upper echelon of education in our city, the very top, the 12% of people who are the most educated, are those with bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees. And that's really low compared to the rest of the United States and even the rest of the world. And it's concerning because education opens up to new ideas and new ways of solving problems. And we have less access to those resources when we have less people who've had the chance to learn.
Yes, and I'd like to look at that from a little different direction, thinking in terms of, we used to be a very high industrial city.
Yeah.
And there used to be a knowledge that when you got out of high school, you had a job, and you went to school and had a good job to work at while you were going to school. Because we have lost that employment base, it would seem that that's part of the reason why we now do not have as many, and I know in my own case, our children just never came back here.
Right, because we don't have educated people, we don't have jobs that require college or graduate education.
Exactly.
And then if somebody does take the opportunities available to them, then even if they wanted to come back here, it's hard to find jobs.
It's exactly, and that's why I say when our children finished college, they just kept on going. Yeah. And so it's really difficult all the way around. And that's why I think lots of times people haven't really thought about the fact that how important economic development is in regard to all of this picture. Right. And I think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. All these pieces come together to explain why this city is the way it is right now. And we've lost so many. We used to be a huge city, which is now has about 50,000 people.
Right, and I've been told numbers between 100,000 and 120,000 that the city was at its
Oh
height.
yes, oh yes.
I mean, those are huge drops.
Oh yes, yeah, and it was a booming metropolis.
Right.
So you've kind of indicated what poverty looks like. Would you like to say more about poverty? I mean, you've traveled, you've been around other places also, so you probably have had a good picture of what poverty, let alone just the food piece.
Yeah. I think poverty in Schenectady is scary to me in part because a lot of our children are really young right now. And that means that their brains are doing the biggest developing that they'll ever do in their lives. And if we're not getting them adequate nutrition right now, they're not ever going to be able to thrive. I also think it's interesting, more so than in our state, more so than in our country, we are a really single population.
Isn't that interesting?
Now, as a single woman, it's good to know I'm not the only person who's out there. And I don't know why we do marital statuses age 15 plus, because I would hope that most 16-year-olds are single in terms of a marital status.
That would be
best for
yes.
them, I think. But within our city, 45% of people are single, as opposed to only 33% who are married.
Wow.
Those are really high numbers and radically different, almost an inversion of what you're going to see in the rest of the state. And some of that has to do with urban realities, and some of it has to do with poverty, and some of it has to do with race.
And some just choice.
And some of it choice, and some of it really also about a distrust in institutions, including the institution of marriage. Some of it also has to do with the number of people who are in prison, and if a big chunk of the population's in prison, they're not available to get married.
This is true.
And I don't necessarily think that marriage is inherently better than singleness. If I did, I might have gotten married somewhere along the line. But often, economic stability is a lot easier to attain when two people are working together than it is for one person alone.
And yes, and it's interesting because a lot of the couples are married couples or people who have chosen to be together, whether they're married or not, both are working in the family and still at the poverty level in income.
And that's
that
what's
term,
so
the working poor. Just every time I hear that, I think it's like an oxymoron.
We have the majority of people who are receiving SNAP benefits are working full time.
And there's something wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with needing SNAP benefits. There is.
No, I said there's something wrong.
There's something wrong with our society saying that you can work 40 hours a week and not make enough money to eat.
Exactly.
We need to be changing our minimum wage laws to make a full-time worker capable of living.
Yeah, it seems like somehow our priorities are askew when it comes to, and the minute someone says, we need to look at the minimum wage laws, then we hear, well, if you do that, we're not going to be able to hire as many people. Right. And to me, the inverse of that is if people could make a living salary, they would spend money and buy the products that people are saying we can't make. You know, there's something that it's just crazy thinking.
As a clergy person, I tend towards the moralistic argument of people deserve to eat and live, but I listened to a TED Talk last week that made just that argument. It was a billionaire talking to other billionaires, and he said, hey, if we pay people a living wage, they'll have enough money to buy our products.
Exactly.
And then he said, and if we don't, there will be a revolution and they'll come for our heads. Your call.
Makes sense to me.
It makes a lot of sense. Even the business community really benefits by people having enough.
Well, sure. And you have happier people, and what happens also because of the way we're set is the underground economy doesn't pay taxes.
Right.
And so the tax base is smaller, but people are getting money. They're just not getting it through employment, the quote legal employment.
One of the other things that breaks my heart as I look at this city, and this is maybe not as unique to our city, but it's, I think, unique to our society and to our time. I see so many lonely people.
Yes.
And my suspicion is that if we raise the minimum wage, and people could work 40 hours a week and not 50, 60, 70, or 80 when they're able to find the work, people would have time to be friends with each other. And we are social animals. We need each other, and we live in a society now where people don't have time to be together. And frankly, this applies to people who are doing a little bit better and aren't in poverty as well. People are working so much they don't have time for relationships.
Exactly. And with what is happening also is because of the technology, that creates a place for a way that people are not in relationship the same way either.
Right.
And so between those two, we're losing that whole sense of we are a tribal people. We need each other.
Common good, best for each other.
Exactly.
And the individualism of our society, I think, is doing great harm, and particularly when we pit one struggling person against another struggling person,
right,
instead of working together to create a society where people don't need to struggle.
Yes, and I call it, speaking of pitting against, it's sort of like a cannibalistic kind of a society.
Absolutely.
I've got mine and you can't have it.
Right.
But I'll take yours if I can get it.
And all of the ways that we assume that I got mine because of my hard work.
Yes.
As opposed to acknowledging all of the levels of privilege that they have. I saw an article this week, and it frightened me a little bit. It said that the only millennials who own homes are the ones who had rich parents.
I must have read the same article.
Yeah.
Yes. And that people just don't acknowledge that.
And there's no acknowledgement of the privilege. And it's really just very simple. Millennials who went to college are the ones who are most likely to be earning enough money to be buying houses. But millennials who went to college and have student loans are using the resources they would otherwise use towards getting a down payment to pay off their loans.
That's right.
And so the only people who can afford to buy homes are the people whose parents paid for college.
That's right. Or bought the home for them.
And then it said of the millennials who own homes, half of them their down payment was paid for by family wealth.
Right.
Because it's such a small percentage of millennials who are homeowners to begin with. And the problem with this, of course, it's much like being married versus being single. It's not an inherently better thing to be a homeowner, but you develop wealth over time if you own a home.
Exactly. And it is an investment, and it also enables you to access other monies.
Yes.
Much easier than if you don't have property.
Well, and if you're taking the same amount of money that you could be paying in rent and paying it in mortgage and taxes, the taxes sort of go away either way. But the mortgage is money that you're going to be able to most likely access again later. And the rent money just goes away forever. So you're taking this money and you're not ever getting anything for it.
When we were going to buy our house, or I sort of said I thought it was time we bought a house, that was what the rationale I used with my husband. We have bought how many houses since we've been married? Isn't it time we buy one for ourselves?
Yeah.
And when we sat down and worked that all out, you could see that very thing, that in paying rent and we were paying utilities,
right,
even though we were paying rent. You know what I mean? And not owning anything.
Right. Well, and I recently switched. I lived for a year in the Stockade, and then I bought a house last year.
I thought I was going to ask you about that.
And I am thrilled to be a Schenectady homeowner. And all the statements are correct. The taxes are relatively high in Schenectady, but the taxes are high whereas the home values are low. So it sort of balances out.
Exactly.
But when I take my taxes and I add my mortgage, it is much less than I was paying in rent.
Is that right?
Yeah. And in both cases, I'm still responsible for my utilities on the side.
So you're actually saving money.
I'm saving money by being a homeowner.
Amazing.
But that's only available to me because I had the opportunity to have enough money to have a down payment.
To be able to, yes.
And those are resources that less and less people in our society have access to. And I'm just really concerned about that, which actually turns out to be a good transition to my next slide. In Schenectady, we have a whole lot more people who are making a whole lot less than is average in our state, and many, many fewer than are making more. So in terms of how many people are making the bare minimum, less than $10,000 a year, we're at about state average. We're at 9%. But then when we look between $10,000 and $15,000 a year, we have almost double the amount of people making that little amount of money. And when we look at 15,000 to 25,000, we have about half as many as the state average. And we remain higher on all of the low numbers. And then when we switch to the high numbers, that's where things get really atrocious. When we look at who in New York State is making between $100,000 and $150,000 a year, on average in New York State, twice as many people are making that amount as in Schenectady. And when we look between $150,000 and $200,000 a year, 4 times as many people in the state are making that amount of money as are in Schenectady.
But in this day and age, that's not really a whole lot of money.
It is not a whole lot of money. And here's the scary one. When we go over $200,000, which from a lot of people's perspective is a lot of money, and from other people's perspective is really not. But in any case, this is the highest rate. We have 1% of our population is making $200,000 a year. That means that the top 1%, that's the line for us. In Schenectady, in the city. There are 6 times as many people in the state on average.
Oh.
So it's 6% in the state and it's 1% here. So we have many, many, many people who are struggling at the bottom of the economic ladder, and not that many who are really doing well at the top, which is a problem for taxes. And it's a problem. Income inequality is a problem in the United States as a whole, but we also see that it's not just the inequality that's the problem. Having a lot of people who are struggling is a huge problem.
That's right.
And because we don't have wealthier people here in as high of rates, we don't have access to as many resources to redistribute from in order to be helping people more.
I go back to the education piece. It just occurred to me the irony that we are in one of the areas of the country that have a multitude of higher ed institutions.
Yeah.
And we have, in this city, we have 2 colleges right here.
We have 2 fantastic institutions of higher education.
Institutions. Just less than 20 miles away, we have a whole system, a whole SUNY system.
Right.
And we have RPI that is less than 20 miles away. And here we sit with this discrepancy in persons who have, well, the discrepancy is if they stay, they can't get jobs.
Right. And so there's a brain drain leaving Schenectady. Schenectady city schools are doing all sorts of great things to improve the outcomes of their students. And yet the students who are doing the best are unlikely to be able to come back and help our city. And that's heartbreaking because it's a wonderful place to be. I mean, as a new resident, I'm thrilled to be here. I love this city. It's a beautiful city. It's an interesting city. People gave me praise when I moved here and moved to Schenectady, but I think people need to open their eyes and look around. This is a great city and there's no reason not to be here.
Well, you've invested yourself into it. It's obvious you like us here.
I do, yeah.
And I'm glad.
Yeah.
That's very good. You have, now, we've been talking about poverty and the need for programs and different things. So what's happening down at First United? That's an inner city church.
It is. We're on State and Lafayette, so we're by MVP and Veterans Park and just a little bit up from Proctor's for those who don't know the city well. We have a bunch of really awesome stuff happening at the church. If you ever want to get me excited, ask me about how much I love that church.
So get excited and tell us.
One of the most unique programs we have is a Sunday morning breakfast. And being as people engage in feeding programs all the time, it would be reasonable to say, why? Why is yours so special? And ours is special because we treat our guests as guests. We give people the opportunity to eat on plates that we have to wash and with silverware, and there are more choices than anyone can ever handle. And there's space made for people to be in community, to eat together, to play together, to enjoy food together, to be at peace. And I have been in many feeding programs in many places in the world, and I think that breakfast is the best of them all.
And now, it seems like I've heard something. You have a reading program for kids also?
We do. That started in January. We realized that literacy rates are abominably low in Schenectady, and we didn't think we could solve all things at once. But we said, well, we have a bunch of people who love to read, And one of the things that matters most to children is having books in the house and being read to. So for the last half-hour breakfast from 9 to 9:30, we have volunteers reading to kids, and then we give them a book to take home.
Ah, okay.
We call it story time, and everybody who's involved in it has been having a blast because there's very few things in the world that are more fun than reading to kids.
Kids are fun.
Yeah. The other really significant ministry we have to help people who are living in poverty is what we call our soap ministry. And I love this story. Many years ago now, I'm not sure, 8 or 10, maybe not that many, there was an issue at the church where people were breaking the toilet paper dispensers. And many churches would have made a choice to lock the doors. And they didn't. Instead, this beautiful community of people decided to give away toilet paper. They figured the reason people would break the toilet paper dispensers was to get toilet paper that they don't have access to. So it eventually was a basket in the hall, and now it's a distribution on 2nd and 4th Wednesdays from 1 to 2 in the afternoon. And we give away a bar of soap and 4 rolls of toilet paper. And if there is an ID card for an appropriately aged child, diapers, and if people ask us for them, feminine hygiene products as well.
Wonderful, because I don't think people realize that all of those items you mentioned, they cannot get with food stamps.
You can't access them.
I don't know whose wisdom it was to exclude those from food stamps, because you cannot live without those items.
You can't get them. And the one thing I'm proud of is that I was the one who noticed that, hey, feminine hygiene products need to be part of that too.
Awesome. Yeah. And so this is you have a lot of people. Do they show up on Sunday morning and on those Wednesdays?
We have a lot of people showing up. Our average Sunday morning breakfast is going to run between 100 and 200.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it can go a little bit higher. It tends to creep up through the month. People get hungrier towards the end of the month. And we
too much month for their money, right?
Too much month for the money. And we serve, I should have looked at the numbers before I left, but I think about 200 families a month through the soap and toilet paper ministry program.
That's
and
quite a number.
I've spoken to people before. I've been really sad when I look, and one of the ways that people in poverty are often derided is that they're told to just get a job.
Yes.
Well, people show up for both the breakfast and the toilet paper ministry about an hour early. And so in the middle of January, if you're willing to stand around for an hour, and we obviously make space for people to be inside, but then inside is a very small space crowded with a bunch of people and a bunch of crying children. It would be a lot easier to have a job and buy toilet paper than it is to stand around for an hour entertaining 3 toddlers. And obviously, people don't have the opportunity to be choosing between those things.
Yeah, and it's the self-image piece, too, to have to go and ask for toilet paper.
How awful. It breaks
I can't
my
even
heart.
imagine having to do that.
There is a quote I have been told. I tried to look it up today, and I couldn't find it online to confirm it, and I'm going to say it anyway.
All right.
Simone Weil, who I think was a bit of a saint, was known to say, "It is only by the grace of God that the poor can forgive the rich the bread they feed them."
Oh.
And I think about that in all of our programs, that we are lucky that our guests are willing to receive the gifts we give them and not hold us accountable for not creating a system
I think that
where they would have enough.
That quote sort of sums it all up. And I'm so glad you could be with us, Reverend Barron. Sara, thank you so much for taking your time to come and be a part of this show and sharing your thoughts on Schenectady. And I'm sure all of us are glad that you have determined to become a real resident of Schenectady. And I look forward to perhaps having you on again sometime. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shirley. This was wonderful.